Well, as I said, as we're this post-Easter season, we're looking at resurrected life. Last week we talked a little bit about, what difference does it make? What difference does resurrected life make in our lives? And we talked about kind of three main things. First, what do I believe? What do I believe happened? How does believing that really affect me? Do I really believe that what I believe is really real? And then if so, how does that change my life? How does that affect my life? And we looked at three small components of planning, of purpose, joy, and peace that God gives us in this resurrected life. This purpose-driven life, this peaceful life, and this joyful life is that they affect the outcome of Jesus being alive. So today our story switches gears, and we just changed the page. We just went from chapter 20 to 21 here, but it seems like a lot has changed. And I don't know the time frame here, the difference between these two chapters, but we flipped the chapter, and now the disciples are up at the Sea of Galilee. And there's some interesting things going on here. In fact, if I had to be honest, there's some fishy things going on here. And I'm gonna state the obvious ones first, and then we'll get into the other ones. But first, I just want to name three obvious observations that seem a little fishy to me. First, it's obvious that Jesus doesn't call perfect people. I'm so thankful that Jesus doesn't call perfect people. The disciples could not catch a fish, and I can't catch fish either sometimes. So Jesus obviously doesn't call perfect people, right? Otherwise, their nets would have been full without him. First fishy observation. Second one, obviously fishing customs and attire has changed over the centuries, right? I don't know how you fish. If this is how you fish, I don't want to know how you fish. But it's confusing in the translation to the English. It says that Simon Peter was naked while he was fishing. He actually would have had a stole, like a garter on. It's just that he didn't have his proper attire to greet someone on, which would have been like a jacket or like a full cover up. And so when it says that, I know some people are like, wait a second. Just a little fishy. Just a little fishy. Third one is this. Obviously, some regulations have changed. If you show up in the office of the Game Fish and Parks with 153 fish, they might start asking some questions. So things changed a little bit, but things haven't really changed really also. Because I want to know, why are the disciples fishing? What are they doing? Why are they even actually back in Galilee? The Sea of Tiberias is the same as the Galilean Sea, so this is their old stomping ground, right? This is their home. We know Simon Peter was from this area. What are they doing? It's just kind of fishy to me that they're out fishing. And here's what I mean. Like I said, I don't know the sequence of events and the timeline of how far apart these stories are, but we know a chapter earlier, that Jesus met twice with his disciples, right? On the night of his resurrection, it said on that first day of the week in the evening, he walked into the room and said, I'm alive. And Simon Peter thought he was saying beehive, and so he ran the other way, but he was saying, I'm alive, right? I'm alive. And he shows them the scars, right? And Thomas wasn't in the room, and so we get the next story where a week later, they're still in that upper room in Jerusalem. This was the Passover feast, so it's a week-long feast, so it makes sense that they're all still in Jerusalem. Jesus shows up again, walks through the wall, and says, I'm alive. Thomas says, let me see your hands, and he shows them, right? And so this is a week sequence. Jesus shows up twice to the disciples. So now we flip the chapter to the next story, the third time that we read today, and I don't know the timeline of events of how far away this is, but now we see the disciples are 120 kilometers, about a 4 days walk away from Jerusalem, from the last time they saw Jesus. And they're out fishing. I try to put myself in the shoes of the disciples, and I try to think, what are they feeling? What are they experiencing? I mean, for 3 years, they've been with Jesus. Every day, they've seen what Jesus has done. They've watched him perform the miracles, the feeding the 5,000, the walking on the water. They've watched Lazarus walk out of the tomb. They've seen these things happen. They've heard the stories. They listened to the parables, and they continue to wonder and imagine what life with Jesus is like. But we know that Jesus also died and resurrected, and we know they experienced that resurrection story in Jerusalem, and they were there for that. And now that they're home, now that they're 120 kilometers away from that, they're looking at their friends and their family, and they're trying to tell them all of these stories. They're trying to share with them all of these experiences, and it's kind of one of those things where it's like, I wish you were there. You should have been there. You went to believe the face of the people when Lazarus walked out of the tomb. You went to believe the people as Jesus fed them, 5,000 of them with 12 loaves of bread. You should have been there. Have you been there? Have you had one of those kind of like out-of-the-box experiences and you've tried to tell your friends and family about it, but it's just kind of like, you should have been there. Like you had to be there for that. Imagine what the disciples were like. They're trying to explain, they're trying to tell the stories, and they're just not doing it justice. And so what do? Well, they do what they've always done. Because you see, after a while, the mountaintop experience becomes, well, just another experience. And you can only share the stories so long before your friends and family kind of are like, okay, we've heard it. You said that already. And so you just start to kind of do what you've always done. You kind of go back to what you've always done, and you start to just live life again. I mean, from the outside, that's what it seems like the disciples are doing, right? Going fishing. That's what I know. That's what I've always done. I'm going to go fishing. But then Jesus shows up. It seems like Jesus always shows up, doesn't he? Jesus shows up maybe when the disciples least expected him because they didn't even recognize him. He shows up on the seashore and he starts talking to them. He starts calling out to them. And it's interesting what he says to them. You don't have any fish, do you? See, on the Sea of Galilee, they would fish at night. It was common practice to fish over the dark hours. And so they would fish at night, and they would cast their nets. They had these nets, and then in the morning, they would come in, bring their haul in, and then they would clean the nets and rest during the day. Jesus shows up that morning, and he says, you don't have any fish, do you? And the disciples say no, and they don't even know it's Jesus at this time. And Jesus says, why don't you cast your nets on the other side of the boat? I'm sure kind of questioning that and wondering why they go ahead and do it, and, well, we know what happens. It's not working, is it? Jesus says. What you're doing. What you know, what you've always done, the default, Kind of those things that you just go back to over and over and over again just because you know them, they're comfortable, they're convenient, they're kind of complacent in a way. I mean, you just know how to do those things. They come second nature to you, so I'm just always going to do that. It's not really working anymore, is it? Jesus says. Why don't you try something else? Jesus says to him. Why don't you throw your nets on the other side of the boat? Do you hear what he's saying? The old pre-resurrection ways of life aren't really working anymore, are they? Before you knew me, you used to live your life in a certain way, and it was fine. There's nothing wrong with it. It wasn't bad, if you will. But sometimes the resurrected Christ changes things. Sometimes the resurrected Christ changes lives and changes what we do, and sometimes the old ways just no longer relevant for the new way. And so Jesus says, why don't you just throw your nets on the other side, because these ways don't seem to be working any longer for you, and so let's try a new way. Let's try a resurrection life kind of way, Jesus says to them. And they do. They obey. They follow him, and they throw their nets on the other side, and they end up with 153 of them. Makes me wonder, where in my life do I need to throw my nets on the other side? Like, where in my way do I just keep going back to the old ways, to the normal ways, to the default ways, where do I need to pick up my nets and throw them on the other side? To start living a new way, to start living a resurrected way, to start living my life like Jesus Christ is really out of the grave, that he is really alive, and he's calling out to me and to you saying, hey, it's not working anymore. It's not the same. You can't meet Jesus Christ and keep doing the same things. Things have to change. I'm making a new way, another way. It's the resurrection way, and you're a part of it. Where do we need to cast our nets on the other side? Well, it's interesting. After they catch these fish, they come ashore, and they have this conversation and this breakfast with Jesus, and it sounds delicious, a little fish and bread on the seashore. And as they're meeting around this fire, it takes us back, because it wasn't too long ago where Simon Peter was surrounding himself with another fire. If you remember, it was just a couple chapters earlier. It was when on Monday, Thursday night, Simon Peter was gathered around a fire, just like the fire that he's gathered around now, except Jesus wasn't there. Jesus was up on trial. Do you remember this night? Simon Peter is gathered around the fire, and 3 times Simon Peter gets asked the question, hey, aren't you one of those Galileans? You know, one of those that followed it. Isn't he your rabbi? Don't you know him? And what did Simon Peter say every time? I don't know what you're talking about. Who, him? I don't know him. I don't know that man. What are you talking about? 3 times Simon Peter denies him. Well, fast forward to today's reading, and Jesus says, Simon Peter, do you love me? Simon Peter, do you love me? Simon Peter, do you love me? Simon, the old ways aren't working any longer. Remember when I first called you 3 years ago, you said that you were a fisherman, and I said, well, I'm going to make you fish for something else than fish. I'm going to make you fish for people. And you started following me. Well, Simon Peter, 3 years ago, I said that you were not going to keep doing the same things over and over again, and now look what you're doing. You're doing the same things that you used to do. But Simon Peter, I called you to a new life, a different life, a resurrected life, and you're not going to fish for fish anymore, Simon Peter. You're going to fish for men. Sometimes Jesus has to start a fire in order to get it to burn deep within us. Sometimes Jesus has to remind us through the fire that we are given the Holy Spirit. The same power that raised Jesus from the grave lives and is alive in you and me. And so we can cast the nets on the other side. Because I imagine from that Monday, Thursday night to the night where Jesus is meeting with his disciples, I imagine Simon Peter had some pretty long nights. I imagine each night that Simon Peter laid down, he would relive the moments. He would relive those days' moments, and there was a lot of probably shoulda, coulda, wouldas in those nights. Man, I wish while he was here I would have done this. I could have handled that situation better. I'm going to try again tomorrow. I can be better at that. I can do more. I can be more. Man, I messed that one up. Man, I really fell short on that. And then Jesus shows up. And then Jesus says, cast your nets on this side. And then Jesus says, do you love me? Do you love me? Do you love me? Then follow me. Because resurrected life is simply this. Follow me.